War of 1812 Tie and Nationalism Cry. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, DMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is October 26th, 2020. By the way, on this date in history, 1 month from today, I will turn 45 years old, assuming I make it that long. So it's 2020. So, by the way, on this date in history, in what was that? What year was that? 1884 was the shootout at the OK Corral, where Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday faced down a group where they were outnumbered 7-4, and they came out the victors. One of the most famous actual shootouts in the Wild West, not all these that were kind of made up just to make the West look like a better place to be than a very poor farmer in the Midwest or rancher. This is always an interesting slide to talk about because of just the way it's termed. But the NonIntercourse Act of 1809, intercourse is not going to be anything that you think it is. In this case, what it means is that the United States will open up trade with the rest of Europe except for Britain or France. So for 2 years, the United States refused to trade with anyone outside of piracy. We still had some people sneaking in some things. You know how New England gets its own rules. Well, anyway, you also have then what I consider one of the most childish bills in our beginning stages of our nation, and that would be Macon's Bill Number 2. Now, Macon's Bill Number 2 reopens trade with Britain or France, but only if Britain or France agreed to trade with us first, and eventually, because Britain doesn't respect this childish plan, that's going to be one of the things that's going to lead up to a war between the U.S. and Britain. So, I'll be your friend if you'll be my friend, but I won't be your friend unless you're my friend first. That is what we've just done as a nation. Congratulations, morons. So now let's get to these two gentlemen right here. They are brothers, okay? You have Tecumseh on the left and his sexy brother, Teixeira. Okay, that's him on the right. I think he lost an eye or he was winking the entire time his portrait was made. I'm not really sure. They're two Shawnees, and what they tried to do was put together some type of confederacy of Native American nations to try and to fight the encroachment of the white man. Let's keep our own land. Let's not give up any more in territory. We need to stop them, and the only way we can possibly do that is by banding together. And I will say that has a lot of merit, that they might have been able to stop the U.S. from seizing all their land had they banded together. But the fact that you have a lot of independent nations fighting one well-armed nation that has better immunity to diseases was always putting them on the negative side of battle. I don't know a better way to term it, but it always put them at the disadvantage. So you have a chance to try and prove it here. Okay, at the Battle of Tippecanoe. So you have Tecumseh and his forces against William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, who we will hear from again. In fact, William Henry Harrison really is the bright spot throughout the War of 1812, although his counterpart in the South, Andrew Jackson, gets a lot more credit and notoriety from what happened. Okay, so Harrison goes to attack Prophettown, the capital city of Tecumseh and Teixeira's Confederation of Native Americans. In this battle, Teixeira dies, and Harrison loses a quarter of his own men. But later on, he realizes that he actually won the battle. You can't always tell right away. It showed that the British supported the uprising, because eventually we'll find out that the guns that Tecumseh and his men had were supplied by Great Britain, and also Tecumseh goes to Canada after the battle as a place of safe refuge. If two of my students are fighting in the hall and I let one of them into my room, to run away from the fight, it would make it look like I'm part of that. although I am a teacher and I'm there to protect, it's probably not the case, but it just makes you look guilty. And in this case, it was. And so this is really the last straw before we have a major fight break out. I will give you the War of 1812, which is fought mainly in 1813 and 1814. Hardly any of the fight actually takes place in 1812. Okay? So, again, welcome to ridiculousness. But yes, the War of 1812, the war that was fought, in a different year than the name of the battle. Anyway, so let's look at this. So the causes of the War of 1812. Okay, number one, you have stopping impressments. If you remember last time we talked about how British ships would sail up next to American ships, and they would impress them and force them back into service, and they kidnap about 6,000 U.S. sailors, or at least 6,000 people who we considered to be Americans. Two was the Battle of Tippecanoe. That was really a turning point whenever they find out that the British are trying to arm and get a fight going with the Native Americans. Really, the British wanted to take the Ohio River Valley. That's where Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan are, and form that into a nation for Native Americans. Never mind that it's in U.S. territory. They could have done that in Canada with the crap load of land they have. Although if I were Native American, I would much prefer the Ohio River Valley because it's such a fantastic farming land. Okay, it's really easy to grow crops on there. My family owned a farm there in Indiana for 50 years, probably longer. I don't know. Well, we don't own it anymore. Not that I want to be a farmer. It's a lot of hard work and not a lot of financial payoff. Stopping attacks on U.S. trade. This is another thing that the British were doing, and they also wanted the U.S. to get neutral rights for trade. So the War of 1812 is really the second war for independence, except this time we have no allies. In fact, it's the U.S. versus the greatest nation on earth, as far as most powerful. The only thing we have going in our favor is the fact that Britain is busy fighting France at the same time. Madison and most of the Southern Democratic Republicans support this war. And the big aim of the war, why do we want to go fight? Well, in addition to getting the things up above, we wanted to conquer Canada. Now, we've got some major problems with waging war. At the top of that is the fact that trade's falling apart, so we don't have money. And if you're going to get into a war, wars are very expensive. Okay? We've been involved in Afghanistan for the last 19 years right now, and it cost about $1 billion a month. I know that we're pulling out our forces, but we were paying at least $1 billion actually for a long time it was $1 billion a day to wage this war. Okay? So I don't know how many $1 trillion we've spent on the war of the last 19 years, but it's been a lot. The Bank of the U.S. was not renewed, so there was no currency. Okay? So you remember how money's important? Well, right now you're forcing everyone in the nation into the barter system because the Bank of the U.S. was not standing at this point. 3, the army was unprepared. And by the way, we declared war on Britain. Britain didn't declare war on us. So we declare war on the most powerful nation in the world, with the greatest army and navy in the world, and we don't have an army. And we go to find our generals. All of the generals at this point, the youngest ones are in their mid-60s. So as far as knowing current military strategies, this is not a specialization that they have. Now, looking at the actual battles as the war starts, okay, you have the U.S. invasions of Canada. We were supposed to invade from 3 separate locations, from Detroit, right over by Niagara in upstate New York, and Lake Champlain. Okay? So all of these battles at once were supposed to make it easy for us to overwhelm the smaller British forces there. But the problem was when we actually go to launch the attack, we have almost no people ready to fight because no one wanted to leave their home states. I don't know if that sounds stupid to you, but let me repeat that. No one wanted to leave their home states, so that's why it all fails. You have the Battle of the Thames. Okay. In 1813, Britain tries to create an Indian buffer state in the Ohio River Valley. I've already mentioned this before. And in this battle, that really, I guess we won, Tecumseh is killed. Now, one of the things that happens when Tecumseh dies is instead of that becoming a rallying point or him becoming a martyr, the whole idea of this pan-indigenous confederation that would fight against that would unite tribes against the U.S. or any other forces kind of dies with Tecumseh. So anyway, okay, so the war is a complete disaster except for William Henry Harrison. That's him on the left, sporting the beaver cut. Okay. In our Navy, Commodore Oliver Perry, he defeats the British and controls the Great Lakes. So the Navy does much better. And you would actually think that this might be the steps towards bringing together a more desegregated society, especially in our military, because 1 out of every 6 sailors were free African Americans. So you would think that we would utilize this part of our population, because they chose to fight and they fought really well and fought really hard, that you wouldn't have problems with integration in the military. But it's not really until after World War II, 130 years later, that you have an integrated military. In fact, it's so far to the other side that African Americans were not really allowed to fight in large numbers because of stupid generalizations about them. They can't fight. They're so wild. They're more likely to fight each other and fight their commanding officer than they are to the other side. These are the arguments put against doing this. I mean, what the crap, people? Seriously. Anyway, so we've already, and by the way, if things weren't getting bad enough, the fact that we're getting our butt kicked in the North, and by the way, you'll see on the next slide just how bad things were. Okay, so where was I? Oh yeah. So anyway, so Britain beats France at this time, and now hundreds of thousands of British troops are freed to fight the United States. So they've just gone from a level 1 battle with Britain to a level 5 battle with Great Britain. And Great Britain, doesn't really care. There's not going to be a lot of effort in this. So at least things can't get worse. Meanwhile, things get worse. Washington, D.C. is captured by General Ross. Okay, he burns the White House and the Capitol building. James Madison, the President of the United States, put together a militia to try and stop the British, but it fails. And as the White House is burning, Dolly Madison saves a portrait of Washington while fleeing the White House. By the way, if you're wondering why in every image you've ever seen of George Washington, he looks like he's 68, it's because every other image of George Washington is destroyed. So what does he look like whenever he's in his 40s commanding the Continental Forces? Oh, he looks like a 68-year-old. What does he look like as a little boy coming down a cherry tree? He has a 68-year-old head. I assure you that Washington did not always look 68. This leads us to our next battle. The Battle of Fort McHenry. 1,000 brave American troops fought behind the walls of Fort McHenry, facing a British invasion force of 13,000 men. And for about 24 hours, the British bombarded the fort. Francis Scott Key sat in the holds of a prison ship, just knowing that the next day that the efforts to hold the fort were going to fail. But when he woke up, he saw that our flag was still there, inspiring Francis to write the Star-Spangled Banner. And the rest has become history. This is where the Star-Spangled Banner comes from. Meanwhile, in Hartford, Connecticut. New England colonists, or not colonists, citizens of New England got together and they protested the war because remember, this is how they made money. So they hatched a plan to try and leave the United States. Okay, they were doing so well, in trade that it didn't really matter what was going on. But the British opened up a blockade, and they thought it was the time to declare independence for their own nation. So the third time in 15 years that they try and turn New England into a nation. There were a lot of Federalists because that was the leading party of the North. And ultimately what's going to happen is the Federalist Party is going to fall apart. So the end of the Federalist Party and really the last attempt to turn the northern states into their own private nation. Okay? Again, during the Civil War, there were a lot of Northerners who go, wow, this is awesome. We didn't even have to do anything. They're the traitors, not us. So we're even the good guys in all of this. But it kills the Federalist Party. By the way, that sounds like a great test question. Okay, so the Treaty of Ghent. Okay, Russian Tsar Alexander I negotiates the treaty in Belgium, bringing together diplomats from both the United States and from Great Britain into the same room. Okay, so they together will agree to return prisoners. The boundaries were preserved between the two nations, and it ends up taking anyway, a lot of this is done with the help of John Quincy Adams. While John Adams was in Europe trying to negotiate for assistance with the United States, John Quincy Adams accompanies his father and ends up actually going to Russia for a couple of years, where he lives in the home of the Romanovs and grows up with Alexander I, and he will, through this, become really one of the greatest diplomats in U.S. history. Okay, we'll talk later about all the other treaties that he signs, but he helps open up negotiations here to end the war. So prisoners were returned, no boundaries changed, but the news, of course, didn't come through immediately. It's signed on December 24th, 1814, but in New Orleans, about 2 weeks later, there's the Battle of New Orleans, where Jackson will defeat the British. Now, this is 2 years after the truce is signed, but as a result, this becomes a major victory for the United States, just in national pride. And Jackson, the piece of crap who won the battle, and by the way, if you want to hear anything nice about Jackson, he wasn't a quitter, but he was really a worse version of Donald Trump. And, I don't know if there's supporters here, and I'm not here to attack you politically, but in Andrew Jackson, you have someone who only did something if it suited his needs and purposes and his friends. Okay? And that's the way he ran things as a president. They call him a man of the people, but he's wealthy. He owns a lot of slaves, and he's famous for being an Indian killer. If you're a minority, stay away from Jackson. If you're a wealthy person, stay away from Jackson. If you're one of a handful of people who you might consider a friend, it's probably not bad for you, but you could end up on the other side at any moment. So the results of the War of 1812. Okay, number one, this is really the war that makes Americans into Americans. And I know you're thinking, what in the crap does that mean? Before this, in 1811, if you ask someone what they were, if they were from New York, they'd say a New Yorker. If they were from Boston, they'd be a Bostonian or a Massachusettsian. You'd be a Virginian, a South Carolinian, a Georgian. It was all based on a Pennsylvanian. It was all based on the state you were in and not the nation. So no one really had this pride of nationalism. But after this war, we have now taken on the greatest nation in the world by ourselves, and we didn't lose. Forget about the tie. Don't worry about that. But we didn't lose, and that's such a significant moment in U.S. history when people actually feel like they're one people. Two, because we fought the greatest nation in the world to a tie, U.S. prestige around the world grows. We're no longer these idiot hillbillies. We're these idiot hillbillies who can fight. And we now have a common culture that we're really starting to become proud of. Most school textbooks before this taught about British history, but now we're starting to develop our own history. We have our own heroes in war, and we didn't win the war because of another country. We won a war because of ourselves. And part of history is developing our identity as a nation. And so when we take these history classes, part of that's inspire you to continue in the greatness of the people that came before you. Okay? Harrison and Jackson were wartime heroes who became presidents. And that's going to be a continuing trend in U.S. history. Now, moving on from nationalism as a country, let's move on to judicial nationalism. And basically, when we talk about nationalism, we're talking about for the federal government or for the central government. So this is all a love and trying a strengthening of the nation of America, not just a certain region of the country. Which, I fear that our political leaders, all of our political leaders, have lost sight of what their role is in our nation. Okay, so John Marshall, first cousin to Thomas Jefferson, and quite possibly our greatest Supreme Court justice, although you might want to put Earl Warren and Warren Burger up with him. Okay, and I wouldn't say anything if you did. And most of you are like, I don't know who the crap these people are. I'll try and change that throughout the rest of this year. Anyway, so starting off with McCulloch versus Maryland. In this court case, the U.S. is trying to reestablish the second bank of the U.S., and there's still a lot of people that are fighting whether or not it's constitutional to create to create a bank of the U.S. that controls the money supply of the nation. And the truth is, to really operate as a viable nation or a trading power of any level, you have to have some form of currency beyond barter or beyond state to state. You don't need 13 individual currencies throughout the nation, or depending on the number of states at the time, which was up to, I believe, 17 or 18. Instead of that, you have to. Sorry if I'm gotten weird here, but there has to be some type of unifying factor, especially financially, if the nation's going to grow and become prosperous. So. As a result, they're going to use the necessary and proper clause so that the federal government can do anything to carry out its powers. And this was a reasonable exercise of this power. In short, Dartmouth College versus Woodward makes it so that it protects contracts from states' control. They want to make sure that the state cannot interfere with any contracts. And the Supreme Court's going to do some pretty weird things just to make sure that that happens. I'm going to go ahead and move on. Cohens versus Virginia. The Supreme Court could take appeals from state courts. Don't worry about knowing about Virginia and the lottery, but the important thing is really the Supreme Court can take any court case in the United States and make judgments on it. Okay, that's the power of the Supreme Court, and that's an important point. Crap, it didn't. But here we are. So, Cohens versus Virginia, Supreme Court could take appeals from state courts and courts on any level, which is really important for the most powerful court in the nation. So for setting precedents, they don't have to wait till it goes through all the courts. They can step in earlier. Now, I will say this, one of the problems with the Supreme Court is they have not always been proactive. Sometimes they've been 20 to 30 years behind what should be done. Anyway, Gibbons versus Ogden. Here's kind of an important first moment, and this is something that was addressed by making the Constitution, but then there's always questions on who has authority in certain areas, okay? Because remember, during the Articles of Confederation, states, if you did business between states and you bought something, you were not going to get any type of fair shake in court, because if I bought something from Oklahoma, they're not going to do as much to protect me as they are to protect one of their own people. Okay? Or if you committed a murder or crime in another state, there weren't necessarily extradition laws. So in this case, we're just looking at something along the lines of what happens if a crime is committed or there's a civil case on a coastal waterway or in the rivers between states. And it's decided by Marshall and the Supreme Court that the federal government controls interstate commerce or trade on waterways or all coastal trade. So if you and I are on the Red River and we're doing business, and even though we're both citizens of the state of Texas, and I sell you an iPhone and the iPhone explodes and, burns off half of your face, you wouldn't try and take me to court in a Texas court. It would go to a federal court. Okay? So that's Gibbons versus Ogden. You're going to see more rulings like this in the future of the United States. Okay? Fletcher versus Peck. This reinstitutes a fraudulent land contract because the state sued over the contract. And so the idiot who was doing this fraudulent contract got to go ahead and sell it the way he wanted to. And what this does is it validates the power of the Supreme Court over the states. So anyway, we have once again made it to the end. I hope everyone's having a great day. And, we'll see you in a few more days, but we've now made it through the U.S.'s first war. Last time, whenever we had Jefferson, we had a transition from one political party to the next. And it turned out to be a lot more peaceful than everyone expected. And if there's a change in presidents over the next few months, I hope that it's at least as peaceful as it was between going from Adams to Jefferson. Or at the very least, just, Obama to Trump. So, anyway, if Trump's still in power, then so be it. But if there's a change, let's just hope it stays peaceful. Well, this is Christopher Dugdale, MEDMA, and I'm signing out. Have a great day.